Chapter 49. Illusions. He could still hear the lingering of the dead voices whispering within the cold and bitter darkness. Again and again, they continued their incessant chant, a hellish song of souls damned to dwell in a forsaken sanctuary. Whether it was one voice or many, Link wasn't sure. He could not distinguish the words, nor was he certain that he wanted to. Whatever these spirits were, they were not friendly. Not when they were trying to drain him of every ounce of sanity. The sooner we're out of this place, the better, he thought, gripping the Master Sword tightly. A grim sort of determination fueled his steps, keeping his mind on what he was here to do. Find the captured villagers, rescue them, and stop the necromancer. Blessedly, he hadn't heard the necromancer's voice again. That was something, at least. Link shivered, not relishing the thought of hearing that creature again. "How much further?" he whispered. He was still expecting something to lunge out of the darkness. Even the slightest squeak from a scurrying rat made him jump. "Not far," Sheik answered just as quietly. More statues gazed at Link from alcoves in the walls, their cold stone eyes peering straight into his soul. He shivered. It was clear to them all that the temple's guardians knew he was here. They kept out of sight, somewhere in the shadows. Link was beginning to wish they'd just attack already. He preferred seeing monsters instead of having them lurk out of sight. He almost jumped when a rat squeaked. He caught sight of the rodent, slipping into a crack in the ancient stone. Well, at least that means no Skulltulas, he thought. More Skulltulas would have meant fewer rodents. As if the temple's denizens had somehow read his mind and decided to play a trick on him, Link spotted glowing, amber eyes up ahead. His hand twitched on the Master Sword's hilt as he grasped it firmly, ready to strike. The amber eyes blinked, and just before the creature took flight, Link caught a glimpse of a bat as Sheik's light brushed against it. "Bats," he muttered, silently berating himself. "I'm jumping at bats now." "It will get worse," Sheik said nonchalantly. "If the whispering is bothering you, I suggest you try to ignore them." Easy for you to say, Link thought. All was silent for now. Well, almost silent.
"I take it those spirits aren't normally in here?"
Navi asked beside Link's ear.
"Otherwise, I don't see how the Sheikah could have possibly worshipped in here and not gone insane."
"It was not always like this," Sheik replied curtly. It was clear to Link that Navi was beginning to think that the Sheikah were insane. He nearly agreed with her.
"What exactly are those voices then?"
Navi asked. "They are the souls brought back from the dead," Sheik answered. "I thought that was impossible," Link said. "It is, and it isn't." Link blinked, confused. "What?" "Forcing a spirit back into the living world is not natural," Sheik answered. "It is impossible to bring them back without them becoming something else." "But Ganondorf was brought back to life," Link pointed out, still remembering the Gerudo King's stunned expression as a scimitar impaled him through the chest. "More than likely, the Triforce of Power protected him from that fate," Sheik suggested. "So what happens when these spirits go insane? They become a shade?" Recalling the stories of those bound to the earth by refusing to let go of the past. He shuddered, remembering the spectral knight peering up at him inside the spirit temple, an apparent reflection of himself. "Not quite," Sheik answered. "A shade will remember who they are, even if nobody else does." They saw a doorway up ahead, as dark as a moonless night. "A spirit becomes a shade because they refuse to go on, bound by sorrows and regrets from a life forgotten by the living," Sheik added. "The souls of the dead, on the other hand, were brought back against their will." "So how are they reborn exactly?" Link asked. "The only ones who can answer that cannot do so," Sheik said, as they halted before the archway.
Some believe the spirits must undergo some sort of transformation before they can be reborn and return with a clean slate. Tabula rasa, Navi murmured. In essence, yes, Sheik said. Unless that process is complete, returning a dead soul into our realm will cause it to become insane. They might resemble the person they were for a day, maybe two. In the end, well, you have seen the results. The necromancer hoped to cure their insanity before he became too insane. Halvard tried to find a way too, by sealing the soul of a dying person within a mask.
A chilling thought occurred to Link. The necromancer tried to bring someone back, didn't he? Someone he knew.
Perhaps,
Sheik answered, her voice hushed.
We may never know what his true intentions were. Some say his intention was to bring back an ancient Sheikhan warlock who was betrayed by the royal family, Arganim. They say that, as he was dragged towards the pyre that ended his life, Arganim swore he would return and bring vengeance upon the royal family. Sounds like a pleasant fellow, Navi muttered. A touch overdramatic, maybe.
Link forced himself to smile. At least Navi wasn't losing her sarcasm just yet. He drew a breath and then asked, "What about the demon you mentioned? The one inside the mask? How's he planning to bring it back if it will only go insane?"
It is possible that since it's a deity, it won't be affected, Sheik told him. Not that it would matter. Majora is already insane. If he resurrects her, we'd be lucky to last a day. 3, perhaps, if we were very lucky.
Link swallowed. He didn't like the sound of that at all. He glanced at the walls, examining its carvings while Navi flew closer to gain a better look. As he did, his conversation with Sheik drew his mind back to the day he was forced to end Volvagia's life. If Link hadn't honored his request to die, would insanity have been Volvagia's fate? He shook away the thought as he cast a glance about his surroundings. Reliefs adorned the wall, showing people kneeling before an armor-clad figure with outstretched wings.
Look over here,
Sheik called him. She was pointing towards the other side of the doorway. He walked over, seeing another section of the reliefs. They were chipped and scorched beyond recognition. Specks of red blood splattered the walls, indicating that somebody had been here.
Not that long ago either,
Sheik noted, doing nothing to banish Link's unease. The little orb of light that kept chasing her whizzed further up the gloomy passage, revealing nothing but stone. He couldn't see any more bloodstains or bodies. It didn't tell them much, except that someone had been here. "Do you think it could have been Impa or Halvard?" he asked. "The door was sealed, but I figured it had shut behind them."
"It's possible," said Sheik.
Her face was grim as she quickly summoned the torch back to her.
"Come on, let's keep moving."
Keep moving. It was becoming a necessary mantra in this place. Link kept pace with Sheik as they walked underneath the archway and made their way through the short corridor. Rooms branched off the passage, leading to empty catacombs. The discarded burial shrouds, little more than tattered rags, and the footsteps marring the dust-smeared floor, were the only signs that the burial chambers had once been occupied. The passage opened into a wide gallery lit by enchanted braziers, their yellow flames feebly illuminating the square room in a solemn dance of light and shadow. The gallery, with its dull gray stone, wound along the outer edge of the chamber. Long steps cascaded to landings, which led to a narrow walkway. There were 4, and in each corner of the center chamber was a pool of water. Nothing stirred, nor waved at him in mocking invitation. Link fixed his eyes on the round stone table in the room's center, presumably the altar. It was sparsely decorated, except for some unpleasant-looking tools used to embalm and prepare bodies for burial. "It's a dead end," Link muttered. He cast a wary glance around the room, the tension in his gut rising as he suspected some sort of trap. He glanced at the wall directly in front of him, which was intricately carved to resemble a doorway. 2 robed figures stood abreast of the door, both holding some sort of sigil in an upraised palm. The figures vaguely resembled the dog-headed deity that he'd seen in one of the Spirit Temple's visions, except that unlike their Gerudo counterparts, there were no crowns adorning their heads, and no ornate jewelry. Their eyes seemed to focus on the fake door, and Link found himself drawn towards it, the whispers getting louder as he did so. Link snapped himself out of his daze, quickly checking to make sure Sheik and Navi hadn't noticed. Navi was eyeing him warily, but Sheik gave no indication that she'd seen anything amiss. "There must be another passage here," Sheik said, not giving Navi a chance to respond. "Right where you're standing." Before Sheik could use her lens, Link cautiously prodded the carving with the Master Sword, expecting to hear a solid scrape of steel against stone. Instead, the tip of his sword vanished, disappearing right into the wall. He took a step forward, letting more of the blade slide into the wall without resistance. "It's fake," he announced, pulling the sword back. "Check what's on the other side before you go through," Sheik said. "Halvard's mask will be more practical than my lens." Agreeing, Link slipped the mask onto his face, and despite the fact he was expecting it, he was still startled when the not-so-fake door vanished, revealing a darkened passage. "Nothing," he announced, before taking a step forward, half expecting to walk headfirst into the stone. Then he'd feel like an utter idiot. Fortunately, that didn't eventuate, and he slipped through into the passage beyond. Navi hesitated at the edge of the opening, looking greatly unnerved. "It's all right," he told her. Navi appeared to test the air in front of her, and then zipped straight into the passage, looking extremely disconcerted. "That was just weird," she muttered, spinning in the air to watch as Sheik entered the passage. From her point of view, it must have looked as though Sheik had simply walked through the stone. "Let's go," Sheik said, taking the lead. The tunnel they had entered was large, twisting its way through the rugged earth like the warren of some animal. Narrower passages branched off the one Link now traversed, making it seem like he was traveling through an elaborate network of tunnels, rather than a temple. Upon investigating several of these, he discovered that they led to catacombs, with alcoves hollowed out of the rocks. These alcoves were decorated with more old burial shrouds, black and rotten almost to the point of being unrecognizable. There were various artifacts inside the rooms too, trinkets, jewelry, and precious gemstones smeared in dust and dirt. They gave some idea of the occupants' rank and status, since the poorer Sheikah were buried with almost no belongings. However, there was one thing that made Link incredibly nervous. All of the alcoves were empty. It was the same in each room they checked, as though the dead had simply gotten up and walked away. Which is probably what happened, Link thought, as they encountered another catacomb that was entirely devoid of any mummified remains. "There are no weapons," Sheik murmured, as they wandered into yet another cave-like room. Just as it had been elsewhere, the alcoves were empty. Sheikah are typically buried with their weapons.
"All of them?"
Navi asked.
"We must have passed over 100 graves."
"Most," Sheik answered. "I guess hoping they'd forgot them was too much to ask," Link muttered. "Do you think they're the ones that attacked the village?" "For our sake, I pray that they were," Sheik said. "Well, that's just great." The thought that there may be a large horde of undead roaming the temple only added to a growing sense of dread that stirred in the pit of his stomach. They kept going, further and further down the tunnel, until Link was sure they were well beyond Kakariko's outskirts. Judging by how cold it was, he was certain that the passages were not leading towards Death Mountain. As much as he hated the caverns beneath its rugged slopes, the heat would have been a welcome reprieve to this frostbitten cave. Finally, as Link thought there wasn't an end to this passage, it ended at a stone door with the Sheikah emblem etched into it. "What's behind those doors?" Link asked. If he was hoping for it to be something pleasant,
He was quickly disappointed. I feared this might be the case, Sheik muttered. What? Link asked. There was dread in Sheik's voice, and he didn't like it at all. This is where Sheikah initiates were once tested to see if they were worthy of joining our highest orders. Link's heart dropped like a stone. You mean like the Gerudo trials? He asked, trying not to voice his misgivings. He knew that, like any fear, focusing on it would only make it worse. It had been one of the first things Sheik had taught him during the brief time she'd been able to train him. I hope not, Sheik said. The last time a Sheikah was tested here was before the schism. After that, it was repurposed.
Repurposed how?
Navi asked, not sounding particularly eager to hear an answer. To torment those who were held prisoner here, Sheik answered simply, running a finger along the smooth stone, pausing when she reached a sign written in Sheikan script that she read aloud. The rising sun will eventually set. A newborn's life will fade.
How cheerful,
Navi muttered sarcastically.
Why are the Sheikah always so negative?
If Sheik heard Navi's comment, she chose to ignore it and kept reading. From sun to moon, moon to sun. Give peaceful rest to the living dead. Sheik's brow furrowed as she considered something. I have seen this inscription before. Where? Link asked. Sheik was slow in answering. My family's tomb. Her voice was so quiet that Link barely heard her. Whatever memory the song conjured, Sheik quickly regained her composure. It refers to a song. The Sun Song. Do you know it? Sheik shook her head. No.
There has to be another way around,
Navi suggested softly. They all looked at the two stone doors on either side of them, both blocked by a shimmering wall of purple flame. We won't be able to. Not if those barriers are anything like the last ones we encountered, Sheik said. Impa told me that the map would show us the way. She rummaged through her satchel, drawing out her map and unfolding it. Getting him to hold the map, Sheik found their passage soon enough. She pointed to the 3 black dots next to it, indicating 6 minuscule notes on the map, situated just next to the little dots that were labeled with their names. Sheik's eyes widened in surprise. Pass me the ocarina. Without asking what she was doing, and despite his curiosity, Link obeyed. After a pensive gaze at the ocarina, Sheik put the instrument to her mouth. A soft trill of 3 notes echoed off the walls. The simplistic melody reminded Link of a bird calling to the dawn, and the breeze whispering through the forest on a spring morning. No sooner did he imagine that scene than the darkness snuffed it away as silence washed over him. Then, before he could move a muscle, there was a loud rumbling of stone scraping against stone. Both Link and Sheik darted to the door's sides as the thick stone tablet slid into a recess. Nothing emerged, and Navi peered around the door.
The floor's missing.
Link frowned at Navi's incredulous remark, and before he could help himself, he stepped out from behind the door to see what she was looking at. The passage of dark stone twisted around a corner, the floor appearing smooth and intact. What are you talking about? Link asked, exchanging a look with Navi. It's an illusion, Sheik said, holding the lens up to her face and then lowering it again. Reluctantly, Link took his mask off. Barely 2 feet ahead, the smooth floor ended in a deep pit that plunged into a gloomy void. Staring at it made Link's head spin, and he stepped back. Ahead, the corridor seemed to end at another stone door featuring a face with a leering grin and hollow eyes. It reminded him of the monster he'd seen earlier, raising its hooked limbs to gore him. That memory sent a trickle of ice creeping down his spine. To assure himself that the missing floor was just an illusion, and for Navi's benefit,
Link stepped back and turned to search the ground. Picking up a few loose rocks, he threw them towards the hole. Sure enough, the rocks clattered as they struck the hidden floor. Without the mask, they appeared suspended in midair. "Good thinking," Sheik said with an approving nod. She took the lead again, holding her lens out in front of her. Navi looked startled when Link placed one foot on a stone she could not see. From Link's perspective, it was as though Sheik was somehow walking across thin air.
"I think I'll just not watch you do that,"
Navi said, sounding deeply unnerved. "All right then." Placing the mask back on, Link met Sheik by the door, calling to Navi once he was safe. "Most Sheikah would not have had the mask you wear," Sheik said as the three companions continued around the corridor. "Only a guide to watch them. Impa told me that much." Just then, a cold breeze ripped through the corridor, and with it came a familiar voice that sent a chill through Link's bones. "The light inside you will die," it hissed. Link turned around, looking for the source, only to find there was nothing but more of the same featureless black stone. "You are tainted. The stains of your sins will never wash out. The light inside you will die." The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Even Sheik gazed around, her blades at the ready. "Show yourself!" Link shouted, wanting nothing more than to permanently silence the monstrosity. The creature, whatever it was, ignored him. "The blood of the dead cry out. Hunger claws at their souls, but it is not food they crave." "Link, just ignore him," Sheik ordered, somehow managing to maintain her steady composure. "That's easy for you to say," Link whispered. "You are tainted. Nothing but tainted, broken little toys, discarded by the ones who created you." Link tried focusing on the candle flame like Sheik taught him. Only nothing came. Nothing but a demon's voice. "The light will never shine upon you again." A heavy silence fell upon the room. Link felt as though the demon had tried to suck every last shred of strength from his bones. "Sooner we're out of here, the better," he said, gritting his teeth, pain pulsing through his skull as the beast's brief contact receded from his mind. "Agreed," Sheik replied, taking out the map again and examining it. "The cells are on the other side of the temple complex. We will need to hurry." "How long will it take us to get there?" Link asked, keeping pace with Sheik as they traversed the winding passage. "I cannot say for certain, for that will depend on any hindrances we encounter." After one last bend in the corridor, they made their way through a door and into a spacious chamber. At its center, the room housed an odd circular contraption made of metal and wood. It resembled a wheel, with 7 spokes protruding from its rim. Each of the 7 spokes pointed to a totem, their tips carved into the likeness of a human skull. An 8th totem rose from the center of the wheel, its tip fashioned into the shape of a cawing raven. The oddest feature of the room wasn't the wheel. There were 3 other doors, aside from the one Link had just came through. The 3rd door was located across a wide pit that ran from wall to wall, dividing the chamber into 2 portions. The only way across appeared to be a drawbridge, which was currently raised. "What's the bet we have to go that way?" Link asked, already sure of the answer. "What were you saying about being hindered, Sheik?" "Perhaps I spoke too soon," Sheik agreed. She held up her lens, examined the pit for an instant, and then frowned.
"It's real this time?"
Navi asked. "Yes," Sheik answered. Tentatively edging himself closer to the pit, Link peered into it. A blue mist swirled, lit from the depths by some unseen magic. Before he could look away, Link felt something tugging at his mind, drawing him closer to the pit. He could hear people speaking, but was unable to discern the words. It wasn't the same malevolent whispers he'd heard earlier, and he was able to hear their presence this time, as though there were people standing all around him. A wave of emotions, not all his own, crashed over him. Misery, despair, pain. There are people trapped down there. What? He didn't hear Sheik's query, nor realize that he'd spoken his thoughts aloud. Odd. If this was an illusion, why wasn't the mask protecting him? That thought, coupled by Sheik suddenly grabbing his arm in a tight grip and hurling him back from the pit, brought him back to reality. It was as though he'd just emerged from a pool of cold water. He gasped, not knowing what had just happened. What was that? He asked, his head spinning as he realized just how close he'd come from accidentally falling straight into the pit. I'm not sure, Sheik said, eyeing the pit warily, but not going near it. Could you feel it? There were people down there, Link said, gesturing at the pit.
I didn't sense anything,
Navi said shakily.
You looked like you were about to throw yourself in.
I almost did, Link realized, feeling sick. There had been something in that pit. Of that, he was certain. There's nothing there, Sheik assured them both. What you felt may have been the necromancer's doing. Remember the candle flame and guard your mind more carefully. If you do, that shouldn't happen again. Right. Link took one last look at the lip of the chasm, a shiver running through him. Thanks. He eyed the drawbridge, realizing that he'd have no choice but to somehow get across that pit and not succumb to whatever presence had invaded his mind. There must be a switch or lever somewhere, Sheik said, turning to inspect the rest of the room. And so they began to look. Aside from the odd wheel and totems surrounding it, one totem for each wheel spoke, there was nothing. There were faces carved into the reliefs along the wall that gazed at them with leering grins. The two other doors in the chamber led off into yet more catacombs that were almost identical to the ones they'd passed earlier. Only, unlike many of the earlier graves, there were more trinkets here, suggesting that these Sheikah were from a higher rank or class than those buried outside the main temple. There must be something we've missed, Sheik said once they'd circumnavigated the tombs a second time. They returned to the room with the raven totem. The faces carved into the wall were still smiling, as though mocking their predicament. Link could have sworn the raven was watching them too. As foolish as it might have been to think, he was half convinced it would come to life and attack. He almost told Navi to stay away, but decided against it, knowing that she'd probably think he was losing it. After he'd almost jumped into a pit, or rather, been lured into it, she'd probably be right. As Link examined the raven one more time, he spotted something. Writing etched into the stone just beneath the bird's talons. Sheik, I found something, he called.
What?
Navi asked, inching closer to what he was looking at.
I don't see anything.
Then understanding flickered in her eyes.
What can you see?
Writing, Link answered, pointing to the inscription. Sheik knelt down beside him, holding her lens up to the stone that Link was pointing at. It says, "Make my beak face the skull of truth," she murmured.
How does that help us?
Navi asked. Sheik's eyes narrowed in contemplation, while Link mulled over the words. He turned to face the totems surrounding the wheel, wondering if he could try pushing the spokes until something happened. That was, of course, hoping he didn't trigger some kind of trap. Finally, as Sheik examined the totems on the room's other side, Link saw a symbol etched into the base of one totem. There's an eye on the base of this totem, he called, getting to his knees to get a closer look at it. Seeing this, Sheik grabbed one of the wheel spokes. Link leaped to her aid, hoping the wheel wasn't stuck from years of disuse. With a groan, the contraption turned, moving the raven with it. His arms burned from the effort of pushing, but after considerable effort, the wheel slid into the correct position. The raven was now facing the right pole. A deep rumble and a clinking of chains told Link they'd succeeded. The bridge on the far side of the chasm lowered, giving them a way across. Link's relief was brief. He didn't want to catch the attention of whatever was lurking in that abyss again, especially while he was on the bridge. Doing his best not to look anywhere but the narrow crossing, he crept across and arrived safely on the far side. The door took them into another dark passage that burrowed further into the earth's depths. When they came to the next room, they encountered more illusions. He'd almost stepped into the next chamber when Navi had exclaimed that there was some kind of trap moving along the floor. Unable to see it, Link took his mask off, and sure enough, he spotted several metal contraptions moving along tracks built into the floor. They featured lethal-looking spikes that could take a man's leg off, and Link immediately understood why Navi was so concerned. "They're not really there," he told her, holding the Master Sword out over one of the tracks, and waited for one of the fake traps to run into the blade. Sure enough, one passed straight through the sword, its path undisturbed. Even with that assurance, Navi didn't stop fretting until they'd reached the far end of the chamber and were safely within the next corridor. After Sheik had guided them through a dozen rooms, Link was glad Sheik had a map. Otherwise, he would never have been able to find his way back, and it was unlikely that someone had been so helpful as to leave a second map lying around. The illusions continued, getting steadily weirder, deeper and deeper into the temple. One room appeared to contain a trap with two blades fixed into a eroding pole. But this was just another illusion. He'd barely entered the next passage before Sheik grabbed him by the shoulder. "What?" Link gasped, startled by the rough jerk. She pointed towards the floor. The floor was tiled, with ancient mosaics adorned with murals so faded with age that the half a dozen raised tiles almost blended in with the rest of the dirt-encrusted floor. What Link hadn't seen was that one of these tiles was about an inch from his foot, a symbol etched into its surface. "A trap," Sheik said, before pointing at the high ceiling. Her glowing spell illuminated the long, sharp guillotines that hovered above the raised tiles. There was one blade above the tile he'd almost stepped on. If Sheik hadn't stopped him, he would have been cleaved in two. "Oh," he said weakly. "Thanks."
I thought they were just another illusion,"
Navi murmured, sounding deeply disturbed. "I would have done the same," Link told her, not wanting Navi to blame herself for his near misstep. Carefully walking around the raised tile, he kept going and tried not to think about the blades that were ready to fall at any moment. Thinking that age would have rusted the mechanism that triggered the traps, and it would therefore not work, was probably too much to hope for. "Did you say this place was a prison?" Link asked, once they reached the end of the trap-riddled corridor. "It was turned into it," Sheik said. "Why?" "I don't think they needed any cells to keep people in," Link said quietly. Any prisoner who tried to dash to freedom would have faced a treacherous and likely fatal challenge. Perhaps it had been intended that way, giving prisoners a false hope that they could escape. It was a chilling thought. If he was hoping that the next room would be more pleasant, he was quickly disappointed. There were contraptions with long spikes running along the ceiling, and given the raised tiles within this room, Link knew what would happen if he made the fatal mistake of setting one off. "Your eyes offend us, child of light." Link shivered as the necromancer's voice reverberated inside his head. "The light must go out." Link braced himself against the wall, fearing that the necromancer might make him trigger one of the traps. When that didn't eventuate, and the contact receded from his mind, leaving with a blistering headache, he groaned, rubbing at his temples. "Remember what I said, Link. Guard your thoughts." "I know," Link replied through gritted teeth. He sighed, and then glanced around to see that they were alone. "I'm just not finding it that easy." "You will have to try," she insisted. "Are you all right to go on, or do you need to rest?" I'm hardly going to get a decent rest in a trap-riddled dungeon, am I? Link exclaimed testily, feeling a wave of irrational anger as pain pulsed through his skull. I didn't mean here, Sheik said with a hint of reproach. Sorry, Link sighed. Let's just keep going. Sheik nodded and then motioned him onward. They reached a small iron door at the corridor's end, which swung open easily. When he entered the next room, Link quickly realized that this part of the temple hadn't just been turned into a trap-riddled dungeon. It was something worse. Chains hung from grime-covered walls. More lay draped across the floor like dead serpents. A forge stood to one side, covered by a thick coat of dust and soot. There was a rack of metal instruments beside it, but Link didn't know what to make of them. Perhaps the oddest peculiarity was the stone table in the center of the room. There was a block of wood there, half-fashioned into the form of a mask that would forever remain incomplete. Strange that it hasn't rotted away after all these years, Link thought.
Is this what I think it is?
Navi asked, sounding like she really didn't want to know the answer. It's a torture chamber, Sheik said grimly. Link trailed off as he realized the gravity of this. He knew what torture was. Having rooms dedicated to it was another thing. The gorge rose in his throat, partly from the memory of almost being killed by Gerudo sorcerers and seeing Forens and Orden whipped and beaten as punishment for defying his captors. There are rooms for this sort of thing? He asked. Yes, Sheik said sadly. Even Hyrule Castle had one, though my father never used it. Everyone thought it was haunted. The child inside of Link was confused, unable to comprehend why people would want to make a room to inflict such misery. Why? Not all view life as precious, Sheik answered solemnly. Others either suffered from war or made choices that caused them to lose their humanity. You mean like Ganondorf? Link asked. Sheik nodded. Link stared mutely at the room's remains, just as stunned as he was to learn the Hylians had once tried to destroy the Kokiri.
Life was so much simpler in the woods,
Navi said, as though reading Link's thoughts. Yeah, Link muttered, feeling a pang of longing for his forest home. He banished the thought a moment later. It was. He fixed his attention to the mask, noting the circle and runes engraved into the stone it rested upon. Even as he drew near the table, he could feel an odd beckoning call pulling him towards the mask. Before he could stop himself, Link reached out and touched the mask. Someone screamed. It was a blood-curdling shriek that rent the silence asunder. In that instant of contact, Link felt an overwhelming sense of pain and anguish that almost brought him to his knees. He gasped, snatching his hand back as if burned. What is it? Sheik was beside him in an instant, alarmed. Then, Link struggled to find words, and he could barely stop himself shaking from shock. Sheik, I think there's a person inside that mask. He was sure he sounded crazy, and half expected Sheik to say something along those lines. Instead, her expression became grim as she inspected the piece of unfinished craftsmanship. Taking care not to touch it, she carefully examined the markings on its surface. This wasn't an ordinary torture chamber, Sheik murmured. This is a soul mask. You must have felt the touch of one of the poor souls used to create it. Link stared at the monstrosity, horror-struck. Can we free them? I fear it's far too late for that. Sheik's voice was filled with calm resignation. The people whose bodies these souls belong to are long gone. And given what we know of the Sheikah's treatment of prisoners, the ones inside that mask are likely insane. I do not even know if they can be freed, unless we destroy the mask, killing them in the process. How do we do that? The Master Sword should suffice. Gazing at the mask, and still recalling that horrible scream, Link grasped his sword, pulling it free from its scabbard. A dozen times he told himself that this was wrong. But if it meant ending their torment, he knew he had to do it. Mercy killing was something he'd seen Soraya perform when she'd found an animal injured, well beyond her abilities to heal, and he knew how much she detested it. This was no different. At least, he tried to tell himself it wasn't. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sheik asked. "If it's the only way," Link said, feeling increasingly sick. The Master Sword quivered in his grip. He glanced once at Sheik, who nodded resolutely, then thrust the sword down. A scream tore through the room, splitting the very air, as Link's blade pierced the mask's unfinished frame. A dozen voices cried out, a wail of endless torment. Link wrenched the blade free, stumbling back from the mask as it exploded in blue flames. The screams went silent, and he watched as the blue flames devoured the now empty vessel. Only when the flames flickered and died, leaving nothing but a pile of ash, did anyone dare speak.
"Do you think they're gone?"
Navi asked. Sheik examined the remains of the mask, looking disturbed. "I can't sense anything," she said quietly, turning to meet Link's gaze. "You did the right thing." "I know." Link looked away from the pile of ashes. "Let's get out of here. I just hope there's nothing else like that." Unable to completely banish the horrible scream from his mind, he crossed to the door on the other side of the room, and only then did Sheik follow him, appearing distracted. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes," Sheik said unconvincingly. "I'm fine." She left it at that, still appearing distracted as they entered yet another twisting corridor. This one seemed to get narrower as they traversed its length, not saying a word to one another. Finally, they entered a stone room stripped bare of most of its contents. There was only an altar shaped like a pentagon, obelisks decorating each of its corners. A bookcase, devoid of scrolls or books, lay on the room's far end. Oddly, it was recessed into the wall, almost as though it could be slid backward.
"There's no lever or switch anywhere,"
Navi observed. "No," Sheik murmured, while she curled her fingers around the hilt of her dagger. "I do not think the door will open by conventional means." "What's that supposed to mean?" Link asked, turning around. What he saw next stopped him in his tracks. "What the hell are you?" Sheik had her dagger against the palm of one hand. Before Link could finish, Sheik cupped the blade, crimson dripping onto the stone altar beneath. She didn't blink, even when she opened her hand to reveal the cut across her palm. The blood, meanwhile, soaked into the stone. "What the hell did you do that for?" Link asked, the sight of blood making him queasy. "The door requires blood to open it," Sheik said simply, as she cut away some of the wrappings on her arm, tying them around her hand. As she did, a scraping sound made Link turn around to see the false wall swing inwards.
"Okay,"
Navi said.
"Trust the Sheikah to come up with that idea. You know, a note saying please say the magic word would have been more civilized."
"Yes, it would have been," Sheik agreed, with no hint of amusement in her voice. Link took several steps forward, and then peered into the corridor beyond. It opened up into what looked like a stone chamber. He wondered if they were back in what he hoped was the main temple. At least that would mean no traps, in theory, unless the pilgrims had been in the habit of making one-way trips. "Sheik, where does your map say we are?" There was no reply, except the clattering of steel hitting stone. Link spun around. So did Navi. Sheik was nowhere to be seen.